Thank you so much, Vikas, for joining me today. Super excited to talk about, your journey in building Abillion app marketplace. Like, look, I've been in this industry a while, over a decade now, and I've seen many marketplaces come and go. And this one is super unique because I think you've built a product where it kind of blends a little bit of news and education with products and reviews for restaurants. It's like this complete ecosystem, which I'm super jealous that you built, man, because it's a really tall feat. But before we get into everything that Abillion is and its sort of mission and vision, talk a little bit about your journey thus far, and even to get to the point where you thought of the idea and maybe what was the catalyst for starting it. But take us on that journey first.
Well, hey Grant, so nice to be here, and thank you for having me on your podcast, on your show. Matt, first of all, there's really no reason to be jealous. Everything that we do, we're this, we're like the kind of business that people call user-generated content. Mm-hmm. What that really means is it takes a community, it takes a group of people to actually build this. It's not us sitting here. I'm sitting here in Singapore right now talking to you, and I've got a team of 15 people, 16 people who we're building the company with. But really, it's this entire community that has kind of gotten together, people around the world that have gotten together to really help us build this. And so, you're one of them, and I really appreciate you taking the time to help us share our story. For me, what we really are, maybe if I just start with Abillion, sure. What Abillion means, right? Our mission is really in the name of our company. We want to help 1 billion people around the world go vegan. We want to help 1 billion people live more sustainably. We want to help 1 billion people live healthier and change their consumption habits, because we believe that changing the basics, like what we eat, how we shop, what we buy, where we go, that is the power that each of us as consumers has to create a much, much, much better world. And collectively, if we have a lot of people doing that, that's going to be the most impactful thing that can happen for the earth. And so that's really it, right? It's important. I think, that what we're trying to do is really build a very new and different kind of social media platform. I think it's something that's been long overdue, where the data that people are contributing isn't being used against them, like we see on Facebook, like we see on Twitter, like we see on TikTok and Instagram. The data that people are contributing to our platform is being used for consumer advocacy. It's being used to make the experience better for people in real life. It's being used to create a more sustainable world. And it's being used ultimately to help influence more people to choose better when they eat out, when they buy products, when they're shopping at the store. And so really it's this kind of like where we've built and constructed this growth loop for our business that really has to that really functions from the perspective of virtue more than anything else. So that's a little bit about us, right? And you asked about my origin story, which is kind of how I got started. You can probably tell from my accent. I am sitting here in Singapore right now, but I'm American. I spent most of my life growing up on the East Coast, and really, really proud to be American, and really proud to be an immigrant in America. So yeah, we moved to the States when I was just 4 years old, from India, and I grew up in New York City. And one of the things I'd say that like really early on, I mean, we kind of took it for granted a little bit, but really early on, my parents raised my brother and I vegetarian, and my parents made that choice when we were just born. And so both my brother and I since birth were raised vegetarian. And in India you don't really think about it, because in India, there's like 1 billion people and a quarter of them are vegetarian, so it's like very prevalent in society. But when we got to New York, it was like, okay, well, what do we eat, right? And and everywhere we go, it meant that we had to ask a question, 2 questions, 3 questions sometimes, right? And it's funny, it's because guess what kids like to eat? Kids like to go to McDonald's, right?
Sure.
So I'd go to McDonald's and I'd get a Happy Meal. I'd ask for a Happy Meal with no meat, so they'd give me a bun with 2 pickles and a slice of cheese and some ketchup and some fries, right? And I thought that was delicious. So, right? And that was just kind of what I grew up around, grew up and kind of down the road, I started to really have a very strong affinity with animals. And I started attending activist events and started doing a lot of that stuff. But really for me, it was kind of like that part of my life was on autopilot. But I would say that it really helped me kind of always choose and have a sense of values in the most basic things that I was doing every day, right? Like what we eat. We make so many decisions around food every single day. It's like probably the one thing that we all do, all of humanity does every single day, where we're actually making a choice, right? And so eventually I became vegan. And what was really interesting about that was it felt like a huge compromise because, of course, growing up in New York, my food pyramid ended up becoming like a slice of pizza. and
classic American dish.
Exactly, right? Or it was like a bagel with cream cheese or something. And and I loved it. But I went vegan for a number of different reasons. And it ended up becoming this incredibly transformative thing for me where it started when I started. I felt like it was a huge compromise and a sacrifice. I was already vegetarian and now I could barely eat anything, but it ended up becoming this thing that just invigorated a sense of purpose and values in my life. And really, I'd say in my 30s was just this incredibly inspiring choice that I made. So, fast forward 2016, I'm here in Singapore, and it's November, and I'm at a US election party.
Interesting.
Where most of the people, I'd say 90, I'm not really political, but 90% of the people in the room were obviously Clinton supporters. And, because we're here, we're 12 to 15 hours ahead of, the US. So it was the morning here and people are slamming martinis and celebrating. And I mean, you should have seen people's faces when they realized who was actually winning. Yeah. But for me, it was a really interesting time because I had up until then in my life and my career never used social media. I had never used Facebook or Twitter. I just kind of felt it wasn't really my thing. But after that election, we learned so much about how these platforms were stealing our private data, how they were using our private data to feed us misinformation, how they were selling our private data to companies that then were basically shoving ads at us, right, spreading misinformation and false truths, and how this wasn't just degrading our democratic institutions and things that are just for us are holy in America, like our right to vote and elections. But they were creating cultures. They were spreading violence around the world. They were spreading misinformation around the world. They were starting to become responsible for things like genocides in Africa, and it felt like, wow, where's the responsibility? Where's the accountability? How can you build a platform that connects 1 billion people? And then say, hey, okay, I have no values. I have no responsibility or accountability. Whatever happens on my platform, if people are liking something or commenting on it, I'm just going to let it spread like wildfire, even if it's something really, really bad, right, or harmful to society, because it's not my right. It's not my right to judge what's harmful or not. And I just felt like that just went against all logic and sort of common sense for me. And of course, I'd say fast forward a few years, there's been a lot of movies and other things. And, we've seen the documentaries about what's really going on in some of these companies. But that moment for me was one where I really started to think about, is it possible for us to design algorithms to spread social benefit and to spread impact and to create sustainability and help people live better, live healthier, live in harmony with nature? Is it possible to actually create an experience where you turn that mindless scrolling that we're all guilty of and turn that into mindfulness? And that's it. So I kind of set out on that mission in 2017. And we started Abillion in July of 2017. It's going to be 6 years since I got started on this journey. And and we got a long way to go. Like we want to impact 1 billion people positively. We've reached 1 million. And so, we got to figure out how to 1,000x our impact from here.
Yeah, it's like I said, I've seen so many, sort of platforms come and go, but I think that the one thing that I've noticed, with the billion, I'm very deep into building a really, really, beautiful platform, very, very user oriented, where the user experience is equal and up par, right, with sort of the big platforms that we know of. That's sort of just a commodity these days, right? If you don't have the user experience and the usability and ease of using it, you're playing a different game, and it's not one that you're going to come even close to winning. So the development and the user experience, I think, is beautiful, and I think it really helps users engage with the content and help themselves, just education, right? I think the biggest part of what I always wanted to do is just educate people a little bit, like show them what's out of their purview, right? They might not know of all these different like products, and whether it's food or makeup or sneakers, right? There's so many different aspects that our consumer power has, right? Like you mentioned before, it's such a huge thing that we have. Like we feel so defeated sometimes, like, or, our vote doesn't matter or this or that. But it's like, the way you spend money matters, probably even more than your vote in a weird way. So I appreciate the work that went into building the platform. But your background was a little bit more like finance, right? You didn't come from sort of computer science or like building apps and things like that. Like, I don't know. I'm just going off your sort of your bio and career path here. But I guess how is, having an idea, right? Is we all have ideas, but actually executing and building on it is paramount. That's the hardest thing to do. So talk us through that phase when you had the idea, right? But it's like, now you got to go execute and build it. Like, what was that like, finding the appropriate team members to actually build the product?
Oh, thanks, man. First, you're 100% right. I know the first thing about engineering, and I know a little bit now. But the truth is, I didn't know. When I left my former career, which was in finance, behind, and I knew that I was going to build something in tech. I knew that I would need to be able to work with software engineers, and so I was like, well, what am I going to do? So I actually, what I ended up with, best idea I could come up with at the time. And it's really funny. It's like, because when you're just not very smart, when you don't know the right or wrong answer, and you just say, okay, you know what, this makes sense, I'm going to run with this. You learn a lot. You can learn a lot. And I enrolled myself in like a 3-month-long coding boot camp, and I literally went to class every day. I went back to school and I went to class every day, and I was like 3 days in. So I was really good at what I was doing in my former job and my former career. And so 3 days into this course, I was already like a month behind. It felt that way. It felt like, wow, I'm the oldest person in this program. I don't know what I'm doing. This is awful. I don't think I'm ever going to learn this. And I tried every single day. I showed up on time. I stayed the whole day. I tried to do as many of the assignments as possible, but I just was like, wow, I'm so over my head. But I wasn't taking the course to learn how to program so I could like build this. It wasn't like the Facebook movie where, Mark Zuckerberg sits in his room for 2 weeks and then just makes Facebook, right? I had no premonition. I had no like assumption that that's what was going to happen. What I wanted to do was basically sit in a room full of other people learning how to code and say, hey, maybe I get lucky and I meet somebody.
I like this. I like
who's
this strategy.
Really good.
Yeah.
Maybe I can actually build relationships with 30 other people in a room. Maybe I can talk them through my ideas. Maybe I can see their struggles. Maybe I can find the top 1, 2, 3 aspiring budding engineers in the program who are really, really talented. And maybe by building relationships with them, I might be able to hire them, and kind of they're starting their careers and I'm just kind of,
right.
And I give them a shot, and, and that's like a good economical way for me to also, kick things off and do things. So that was kind of like, that was the nutty idea. There was a lot of like ifs, right? And like wishful thinking there. But the funny thing is, and it was so painful, those 3 months were awful, but like, that's exactly what happened. Is a week or two in, I was already talking to some of the engineers that felt like, wow, these guys are like way ahead of everybody else. I was already talking to them about my ideas. And then, when it came time to finish the course, it was the same thing. It was like, wow, okay, I walked away. Like, I ended up working. A guy who had multiple offers came back to me and said, you have the most interesting ideas. Let's work together. So we got really lucky. And, it was kind of like in the beginning, we didn't even know we had built some websites. We didn't know how to build an app, right? We started the company in July. We launched an app the following May. Everything was super clunky. It, would take a minute to upload a photo. A lot of things didn't work. And I'd say that all that we have really tried to do over the last 5-6 years is iterate. And so every 2 weeks, we publish a new update. We're constantly listening to feedback, right? If you have any friends that are vegan, that vegans love to give you their opinions. And so, we've benefited from that, right? And listened to our users, and then, and leaned in terms of building a community and trying to scale it. And, and we've made some good we made other decisions when we didn't know what we should do. Like, it didn't feel right when we had such a crappy product that we're going to spend all this money marketing it and building a brand and spending a ton of money on marketing a brand. Yeah. If, and play this sort of game that, hey, the product will catch up and get better. I felt like we need to get the product. We're a user-generated content platform. One of the hardest things that you can do in tech is build that, because when you're very early stage, why would anybody come and create content on your platform? You have no other users, you have no engagement, your product is clunky, right? To your point that like there's got to be all this parity in the market, right? And I kind of, I hear you, and you're right. Like whatever functionality you put out there has to work. That's what I would start with. That doesn't mean that you can't have a Reddit style message board.
Sure.
And that is incredibly valuable, right? Even though it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of TikTok and whatnot, because there's just a lot of people out there that prefer to use that format and style of kind of communication online, right? And so, but I think the key is that whatever you put out there, right, it's got to work. And it can't have too much friction for the user. And I think that's a lesson that we have learned over time rather than wisdom that we had before, because you kind of also have this thing about like, you want to put stuff out as quickly as possible. And, so it is a lot of work. It is, I think people have a simplistic view of apps, but it's like any other business. You've got to think 5 steps forward, 5 steps back, and you got to think about how it's going to impact users and, current users, old users, new users, and, and how you really build and scale. And then ultimately how you kind of, create something that you create a sort of a commercial business, but one that really plays well into what it is, the ethos of your business, right? I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. You mentioned early on sort of looking at how, social media apps, quote unquote, worked, get a lot of users, sell data, sell ads, and the user is sort of the product, right? And they don't necessarily get quite much out of it. They kind of just make these companies sort of bigger and bigger because they give all the good stuff to these companies for free, right? I mean, it's a great business model if you can do it. Like you mentioned, how early on did you get people to even beta test, early on when, you're not a big name, you don't have all this funding, you're trying to build something from the ground up. What was it like? How did you even get those first 500 to 1,000 users?
the first 10.
Yeah.
I think every step of the way, it's been hard, man. So again, for us as a user-generated content platform, what was really important was, okay, how are we going to get people to come and create content? And how's that content going to be any different than what they're creating on Facebook or Instagram, right? We're not trying to recreate a vegan Facebook here or a vegan Instagram here, right? We're trying to do more. And then how can we use that data to convince businesses to increase sort of their supply and, and quality of plant-based options? So we had a lot of sort of, we said, hey, look, there's this mission, right? And how do we get very mission aligned people on board. And so, we looked at putting ads on, Google and, and social platforms. And it just felt like advertising was one of those things that feels a lot later stage, right? Like when you have a product
Sure.
that works really well, where people can drop into it and they're creating, they might be buying stuff, they might be doing other things, but the reality is that it's a very mature product that works really well. And what we needed people to come on board and create that content and even live through the clunky experience, help us make that better, but live through that clunky experience and still kind of keep going. And, I just didn't feel like spending money on marketing was going to really get us there. And so what we did is we started talking to animal sanctuaries, farm animal sanctuaries around the world. I've been a big supporter of animal rights and animal sanctuaries since I was a kid. And I was like, hey, what if, so animal sanctuaries, unfortunately, and sort of the whole animal welfare, animal rights movement, what's really interesting about animals is of all of the charitable causes that are out there, animals actually receive the least. They receive the least. It's children and sort of hunger and poverty and education that tend to receive the lion's share of sort of, nonprofit funding around the world. And I said, hey, you know what? This is really important. Obviously, when it comes down to things that people are eating, when it comes down to the kinds of products that people are buying, whether it's a pair of shoes or a jacket, right? The animals are incredibly disrupted from this, right? It's the animals that, whose lives are being taken. What if we created a bridge to, in a way, help people understand the impact of their food choices? So we create, instead of marketing and just spending money on other platforms marketing, what if we actually created like gamification in the product where by eating something vegan, by buying something that's sustainable, by then taking a photo of it and sharing it as like, hey, this is what I did today, to be more sustainable, or this is my good deed for the day, right? By posting that review, they're helping other people also find those options, right? They're helping that business improve. And then likewise, we're backing that up with a life-saving donation that we make as a company, and they can decide where that money goes. So what we did is we created this international kind of coalition of nonprofits. As of today, we have about 65 organizations, and many others, a lot of farm animal sanctuaries, groups like Sea Shepherd that's driving marine life conservation. And so we've gamified the product where if you eat something vegan, we reward you with up to $2.
Wow.
That you get, and you get to donate. So we've created this whole new way of rewarding content creators, not with money that they can withdraw and then they can use for whatever, but instead with altruism and with this connection back to the planet and the environment and animals. And because of that, we have managed to create this incredibly altruistic community and this valuable business. And it's all been through donating, creating this sort of mechanism for our growth, which actually involves us donating our company's money rather than spending it like every other company on marketing.
It's really powerful, man. I think the business model is also the next phase of this. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on is now that, I guess, at what point did you realize what the business model would be? Was it talking to brands and be like, hey, would you want to somehow, do an annual fee to be able to have like a verified company page? I guess talk about the evolution of the business model, because at the end of the day, it could be, a great product and, it could have a great cause to it. But if it doesn't have a sustainable business model to it, it goes by the wayside like a lot of other things. So talk about that for a second.
You're absolutely right, Grant. I mean, for us, it's always, look, we've always had, this has not been sort of like another, just like a project in the sense that, hey, we'll see, but it's always been a business in kind of evolution. And we are venture funded. So like, we're not profitable yet. We think we're going to hit profitability, probably middle of 2024, maybe around this time next year. So, we keep our expenses low. We focus on building our business. And a big part of that is, I think I think everyone will understand this once it clicks, is when you go, you mentioned just general people posting photos of each other or whatever. When you go on other platforms, when you go on Instagram, when you go on, Facebook, when you go on TikTok, that's what people are doing. People are just kind of hanging out, doing stuff, right? What's interesting about our platform, and so the thing that brands are spending money on these platforms is to target consumers based on what they're looking at, based on their affinity, based on maybe the schools that they went to or the place where they live or their age demographic or their gender. And then, of course, what companies like Facebook know about them from what they're looking at and engaging with, right? What's different about our platform is that 99% of the content that's created on our platform, all that social content, is actually photos and reviews and posts about people and what they're eating, which means where they're buying their food or the kinds of products that they're buying. Or, we have 150,000 cosmetics products on our platform that have been rated and reviewed by our community. And those are all clean beauty, cruelty-free products from around the world. We also have fashion and we have food. Overall, we have 900,000 products and options at restaurants across 110,000 restaurants globally and 107,000 consumer products companies. I had no idea there's 107,000 consumer products companies.
Right,
just in the category of plant-based meat, we have like 40,000 plant-based meat products from around the world. Things that you could buy in a box effectively at a store somewhere in the world. And so it's really interesting. It's like this movement is huge. It's already growing. It's already huge. And what we're doing is we've created the levers for brands to claim their listings, claim their pages, engage with customers, for them to not advertise on our platform, but instead have all of the content that their customers are creating about them work for them. Almost think of the content that customers are creating working for them as ads, so they never actually have to create an ad themselves. And it feels a lot more authentic and organic, right, when we're boosting the content that their customers are creating about them. And ultimately it's this, it's the ability for brands to plug into that, for businesses to claim. And then on top of that, we have a marketplace, and we've created a really innovative marketplace. There's just a couple of requirements. Anything sold on our marketplace needs to be vegan and it needs to be sustainable, right? And different people have different ideas around what sustainability is.
Sure.
That's why we add in the vegan part, because I think that part is very clear, in terms of what that is. And and anybody anywhere in the world can start selling on our platform. So we're helping people start businesses and create businesses. We have artists and we have authors and we have people who are making food and people who are making other products. And we have brands on there that are starting to sell. And it's truly amazing seeing this, because it's like we're building this kind of new ecosystem. I'd call it Etsy 2.0 because, it's a more sustainable version of Etsy in a way. I mean, we love Etsy. We love what the Etsy created. And so by no means am I trying to compare us there in any sort of negative way. It's just so inspiring what they've done. I think the next iteration, the next step is to really develop something that helps a whole new generation of entrepreneurs get started, right, in a space that really matters. And so our business model is twofold. We have a subscription product where brands around the world can sign up and receive a lot of benefits by kind of plugging into our platform. And then we've got a marketplace which exists in app where anybody can sell anything around the world, where people can buy things, people can support local creators, and that really just got going as well, like last year. So there we earn a fee on every transaction, on every successful transaction. But it's completely free to list. So because we just want to encourage people around the world to kind of get on there, and that's kind of how we're building our business is these sort of two key levers for our business.
You mentioned that you're venture backed, and talk us through that journey for a second, because a lot of founders I talk to, and raising money, especially as a first time founder, can be daunting, right? Just as that 3 month sort of coding boot camp, it could be three months, 6 months, a year of trying to raise capital for an idea that you have. I guess, what advice would you give to potential founders going out to raise, small or large, for their idea that they have, in this space of, whether it's sustainability or, socially conscious, social entrepreneurship. It's still sort of a different area, but talk about that journey for yourself.
Yeah, it's really tough, right? But I'd say I think we have a really unique mission. Not everybody sees it. I think it's really important. I'd say one thing that for me, this journey is incredibly hard. Raising capital, between working with your team to, pitching clients and, doing the customer service, both to, your clients as well as your users around the world, managing a team, building a team, keeping a team motivated through things like COVID and everything else that's happened in the world, and, and the great resignation and all of these things.
Right.
And raising capital for that is incredibly difficult. And I think that the one thing that has made it, why am I on the phone right now? It's 10 o'clock at night here in Singapore. The one thing that's made it incredibly motivating for me is the purpose. It's the values. It's the fact that the mission that we're on here with Abillion, the values in our organization and in our community, and our purpose are so aligned with myself. If Abillion succeeds, Abillion solves for something that is very, very, very important to me in my life. And that's what it's like for a lot of our community. A lot of our community are incredibly passionate. And I think that's the rocket fuel. That's what gets you up at 6 a.m. to get on calls. And that's what keeps you going through all the bullshit. And that's what, keeps you grounded when, you keep hearing no's and no's and no's and no's from investors. And you just kind of hey, you know what? That's cool. You just keep fighting because you know that it's something that's so meaningful and is so important.
I'll end here on a little bit of the future. And you mentioned sort of the sprints and the iterations early on about, building and iterating and adding. What does the next sort of 3 to 5 years look like for you and the team? What sort of goals and successes you would like to achieve?
Oh yeah, look, we have a lot of ambition, right? We've grown the community to a certain scale. We want to get to in the next 3 to 5 years. How do we bring on another how do we bring on 5 million people, 10 million people to join this movement, to make what we're doing truly, truly impactful? How do we develop those network effects? How do we make our marketplace a success? How do we make our SaaS product a success? How do we go from, we've donated $3 million, almost $3 million. I think we'll hit 3 million in the next 3 months. How do we go from 3 million to $100 million donated, and do that in a way where we are building and becoming and staying profitable? So that's for me, that's something that's really key is how do we do some of these things, and show the world that, hey, you can build an incredibly profitable business. You can build an incredible business by doing right for people and for animals and the planet every single day. That's the dream.
Promise, last question, because I want to hit on this because I think you've taken a path and a journey that I think a lot of people aspire to. Maybe they had a career and then something happens in their life and they really want to start something. Again, just maybe advice for, first time founders or emerging founders that are coming up in the sustainability space, or just want to build something based on their passion. I guess, what are some of the few tips that you would give people at that point in their life, taking that first step into, trying to creating something special?
Believe in yourself, right? I mean, if you're thinking, for someone who's thinking about it, it's really hard to take that plunge, right? Especially if you've got a job, especially if you've got a family, right? Especially if you've got people to support. If you don't, if you're listening and you're listening to this and you've made it this far and you're in your 20s, you're in your early 20s, and you don't have, you're not married, you don't have necessarily kids, right? You don't have a mortgage. This is probably one of the best times for you to go and take that risk, because you have very little, in a way, hopefully you have very little to lose, right? You'll just, even if you were to fail, and there's no shame in failure, But even if you were to fail, you're going to be just so much more attractive in terms of, hireability to people around the world, employers, because they're going to be like, wow, okay, this person tried to start a business. That's hard. If you're older and you've got all those other things,
Sure.
It's still, try to figure it out. Try to see how you can make it work. When I started this company, it was just me and my wife, but we were on the cusp of sort of trying to, grow our family, build our family. And it was a really, really tough decision. But I was very lucky that my wife was super supportive, and she said, hey, you know what, you got to do this. You should do this. And so I was very fortunate. And it really helps, I think, to sort of have a unified family. I think it's really important to talk about the possibilities, both good and bad, and to really just be very realistic about the future. Like, be really realistic about what the first year, 2 years is going to look like, because that's hard. And then, you've got to make some tough decisions along the way. Like, what kind of business are you building, right? What kind of cash flow will you potentially have? What will you have revenue coming in, right? Or are you going to be building something that does not going to have any revenue coming in for a while? And you have to just kind of, I'd say, just think through all of these things and think about your lifestyle and all of that, and just make sure you've kind of thought through that. So you kind of have a little bit of that thought out, right? You may not have all of the answers, but at least you're thinking about that. And, I'd say go for it. It's just such an incredible journey. You really learn what you're made out of. There's so much to managing a business and building a business. And for anybody's business that I've been part of, that I've been lucky to be part of over the years, it's really humbling to try to do it myself, because you realize, wow, what the journey that those people went through.
Amazing, my man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time again. I know we're on very different time zones, and it's it's just a testament, right, to what you're building, how you look at things as a founder, to stay up late on a weekday to get something like this done, right? And I think that's just showing the effort and showing what it takes to kind of do this thing right, and do it the best way you can, and always sort of be in grind mentality, right? Because this is the type of things that separate founders from other founders, and separate perhaps success from failure in the long run, having that mentality. So thank you again so much for taking the time, and best of luck to you and the team for the next decade, my man.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Grant, for the time. I just really appreciate you taking the time for me. And yeah, I don't think I can complain at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. It's pretty par for the course. So it's just doing my job, man. My job.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I'm just happy we're not talking at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you, man. That's extreme, but like you said, you've done it, and you continue to do it, and that's, it's special. It's special. It's special to have that in a leader of an organization and a company, man, because, leading by example is tremendous.
Well, thanks for that, Grant. I really appreciate it, man.